everyone. This is Exploding Topics, and I'm Sintayo Tamrat with this edition. And with this edition, we'll try to discuss on the CNN effect and the Ethiopian cause. And here I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Antanas Agai from Addis Ababa University Communication and Journalism Department. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Antana.
Thank you.
Well, let's just try to start our discussion with what the CNN effect is.
CNN effect, or the CNN effect theory, is very popular. It's well known since the early times in the Vietnam War, beginning from those old times. But the point is, the CNN is the agenda setting agent of the United States of America in terms of economic and shaping the economic and the political context on which the Congress can develop. And so the main intention of this organization, or the purpose of this organization, is to set agenda that could be both local and international, and shapes the whole politics and economics of the world. And they also try to accelerate. The process and to get decisions. So in general, the foreign policy of the United States is entirely dictated by the agenda setting of the CNN effect.
Okay. So why are they just trying to affect countries, intervening in countries' internal affairs with misinformation and disinformation? Because there are several countries that have been affected, even dismantled, with the CNN effect.
Yeah, it's, the most important thing is CNN effect always brings agenda on the table by which the Congress can discuss on, and this media institution pushes so that the decisions in one way or the other can affect the world. So there are a lot of examples on which the CNN effect has critically devastated some of the countries. Like, for example, if we can take the Middle East as a case in point. In the Middle East, I think we know about how the Middle East is, shaped, imaged by the rest of the world. So it is the effect of the CNN on which most people, including opinion leaders, try to make a different picture about the country or those countries in the Middle East. And as a case in point, if we take Iraq for example, during the war, and it was coined by CNN as Iraq's freedom kind of operation. And in that, there was a tendency to associate Iraq with Al-Qaeda. And those kind of, giving brand to a particular country, and at the same time, without understanding the context on the ground, they already make use of a linear equation to particular problems. So wherever the United States and, whenever we think of the involvement of the United States in foreign countries, and through the CNN effect, it is always devastating in terms of consequences. So if we take the same Iraq as a case in point, for the last many years, this country has been a conflict zone. So intentionally or without intention, the CNN effects brands the war, and at the same time makes use of different strategies to dismantle a particular country. And what is interesting is the way they exit from the country is devastating. So another good example is about the CNN effect is on contrary to the other countries, it is unique in terms of what we call the CNN effect saturation. If you remember, because of the graphic image of the soldiers, and that graphic image.
You mean just the soldiers in the U.S. soldiers
in
Somalia?
In Somalia.
Okay.
So that picture, that graphic material was very viral throughout the Western media in general, and CNN in particular. So that has damaged the image of the U.S. soldiers, on contrary to the intention. And at the same time, there was public anger, or the opinion polls show that it was working against them. So the Iraqi case is a different one, or it's about, you know, harming Iraqis, but the Somali case is going against the United States interests and images.
Well,
So these are two examples, and we can also raise other examples in the course of our discussion.
yeah, and finally, when the U.S. troops just came out of these two countries, particularly, in fact, in any case, as the U.S. troops leave or exit those countries that they occupied, the countries are never stable again. We can just mention Somalia for the last many years, and we can also just mention Libya, Iraq, and the very recent case Afghanistan. So is there just any relation or bond or ties between the CNN institution and the U.S. policy makers or the U.S. government?
There is a direct relationship, and the relationship is quite clear. Before the war, usually the CNN tries to brief and frequently targets a particular country. So in that process, there is what we call the blaming and the shaming of a particular country, and trying to give, you know, to bring to the table, to the attention, and narrow every focus to that particular country. And then after that, an attempt of, you know, giving a different picture, trying to explain that there is this and that kind of problem in that particular country. And they act like caregivers, you see, saying that there is human rights violation, there is this and that kind of problem. Then that is a prerequisite for military intervention. So, and during the military interventions, they are in the war front. They always try to, you know, present news stories in the way that favors the United States, and at the same time doesn't give us the real picture. And that's usually remotely connected to the reality on the ground. So the problem of, you know, lack of context, in a cultural context, for example, and it's saying that usually they interfere in a different culture, in a different religious society. So that, you know, brings a gap in terms of understanding what is on the media and what is on the ground. And what is, again, sad in a sense that they leave the country. The way they exit from the country is sudden, and it's not, you know, pleasant. You can take the Afghanistan case as case in point. And finally, that country remains either stateless or always in a war situation. So you can take all of the countries that the United States intervened in, and that was actually dictated by the CNN effect. So the intervention is not actually helpful, and rather devastating for most of the countries. Libya is a good example. The Afghanistan and Somalia, all these countries have entertained a number of problems, and still some of them are stateless. So the CNN effect in general had a devastating consequence to most of the countries.
What surprised me here is that the CNN talks about just the humanitarian, dire humanitarian condition in such countries. And one of the issues that could be addressed is, for example, a sort of humanitarian aid and building democracy, peace, and so on. That is why the U.S. intervenes in such countries. But after the exit, after 10 years from Afghanistan, what the U.S. President Joe Biden said during media briefing is quite astonishing, quite contrary to this. He said, we were not in Afghanistan to build democracy. If they were not just to build democracy within those 20 years, how could the U.S. Unable to stop the rebel groups and left the country in such situation?
Yeah, it's exactly the same in Iraq. If you remember, the CNN branded the war in Iraq as Operation for Iraqis' Freedom. That was how it was branded. The same is true now. Joe Biden denying that particular phrase. And they applied the same thing to Afghanistan. and now he denied it. So, like I said to you before, the way they go and interfere in every country is the same, and all of a sudden they deny,
Sure.
like what Joe Biden did. So it was like a kind of operation for Iraq's freedom or the Afghanistan's freedom. But at the end of the day, there is no freedom or there is no democracy. And these countries remain in a war scenario. So the point that you raised about the aid agencies, there is a correlation between CNN effect and the US aid activities. So what kind of correlation is there? So they are doing this at the expense of the people's interfering. They are interfering, and at the same time they act like a caretaker. The US aid as a caretaker in a war scenario in which they are exploiting the war and mischaracterizing the war. So think about the propaganda machine and the aid group acting like they are caregivers or takers, and at the same time they are doing for the same. So it is a kind of an instrument. The aid is a kind of instrument to fuel the war or to avert the war in the way they prefer. So that's why they are doing the same thing in Afghanistan. Even in Ethiopia recently, we've seen a lot of related points. I think we will raise that later. The same approach is used. Aid as a weapon of media manipulation. CNN effect is the one that manipulates the aid of the United States. So it's just like, fueling and trying to bring water to, but it's a kind of manipulating the media and giving a different or a wrong picture about a particular country to satisfy their own needs.
Yeah, and one thing that I would like to add here is that we should not specify the case only to the US government, because just the CNN effect is also related to not the US aid, but more aid agencies, because it is these aid agencies that were trying to spy the maneuvering of the Ethiopian Defense Forces last year, if you remember, as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed just said that in his parliament. And also there are other governments that are acting in response to the CNN effect, in response to the CNN news coverage. There are just some countries, Western countries, I mean, who are just revising their policies against a certain country. So we should not just specify the case.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about the CNN effect and interest. The same is true with some other Western medias. It's not only CNN, but we limited ourselves to CNN for this show. But you see, and again, it's not all the Western medias going against Ethiopia. We know that Ethiopia has friends, present friends from the Western countries and Western media. It's not about that. The point is there are also other institutions, aid agencies that work in collaboration with CNN, in collaboration with CIA, in collaboration with USAID. I read the USAID because that is the most important institution in terms of, they call it international development or cooperation. But I see that as an aid institution. The international cooperation is a two-way. You see, it's an attempt of sharing and trying to build, or to heal a situation. But this is an aid. Aid means something that you give and you manipulate at the same time. The intention and the way, when you look at the whole picture of that institution, is all about giving and dictating.
Well, that's right. And let's now come to the cause of Ethiopia, the CNN effect and the Ethiopian cause. Since last year, I mean, just from the onset of the conflict in North Ethiopia, the CNN has been just making media campaign, a lot of media campaign, not in fact the CNN, Reuters, and also Al Jazeera, and some other medias have been just making a great many campaigns on Ethiopia against the reality on the ground, including, if you remember, the TPLF soldiers or fighters have circled or sieged Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. So they just reported this using image from any other source. And that is the point that we need to discuss. And why do you think is that?
It is a shame for CNN. It's really disturbing for CNN to act that way. The Northern Ethiopian war, I think, has clearly helped us to understand what CNN is. After all, even the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said CNN is fake. And the people there are fake, quoting him. So when you look at how the CNN acted against Ethiopia, I think we can raise a number of examples.
No. Go ahead, please.
I'm heading to that, yeah. So in the first place, if you look at all the stories on CNN and the language, beginning with the language use, it is entirely in favor of TPLF. Sometimes if you look at how the words are coined and how the sentences are written, they all ideologically in favor of the junta group. So if a very good example is they try to equate TPLF, try to equate TPLF and the Ethiopian government parallel. And at the same time, when they say Ethiopia and Tigray, it looks like Tigray is another country. You send that kind of picture. And we know that from different literature, we know that CNN is well known for biases in terms of selection. So if you look at all the news from CNN on Ethiopia, they try to frequently report a case which shames Ethiopia. So they try to pick a particular story when that story is against Ethiopia. Whenever Ethiopia is doing well, they are not interested to report. At the same time, when Ethiopia is attacked by like TPLF, and when the TPLF did something wrong, they don't report that, as if they didn't see, they didn't hear.
Sure.
That is what we call the selective approach of bias. So CNN is popular for this. A very good example is the USAID warehouse was looted by TPLF in the Amhara region. They didn't report that. We know that the time was when TPLF was in the Amhara region and they looted the warehouse. And even the USAID boss, I think one of them, he didn't condemn TPLF. And the most recent one, like in the Mekelle, you remember the petrol from the UN, it was it was stolen. But that was not critically evaluated. That was not critically condemned. So, and that is not reported. That was not well explained. The other thing is CNN is well known for partiality. It is always partial to a particular. If you look at even within the United States, it favors the Democratic Party and it's against the Republicans. It's clear, not only in the worldwide, even in their own country. So partition is a serious problem. And the other thing is, TPLF has often fabricate fake news, and then that helped by what we call the international consultants, paid international consultants immediately reach CNN, and the CNN without checking and balancing. CNN is well known for not triangulating data. It always produces one side of a story. So that is often in favor of one particular group. What's funny and interesting is they act like they care for people. A very good example is, if you remember, the Lord's Army, the Armed Lord's Army in Uganda. They were accused by CNN for making use of child soldiers, about 30,000 child soldiers, and that was propagated on CNN most frequently in those days. But when it comes to the Ethiopian case, we know that the TPLF is making use of mass,
Human wave.
human wave, and kids are all often on the front. And that was clear, but CNN doesn't see or doesn't hear anything from what is on the ground.
While there are just a number of footages.
Exactly, exactly. So the point is, it is intentional. It is intentional. And look at, I think very recently we observed that the US aid bags were found in the fighting fronts. So that witnesses US aid is giving those aids to the soldiers of the TPLF. That is clear. So that is how we observe it, and CNN didn't report that. So that means they are working collaboratively. Even though there is no data that TPLF pays for CNN, but it's quite clear that it favors TPLF. I mean, CNN favors TPLF in many ways. So we can also raise some other examples in a way.
Yeah.
If we have that.
Here, one thing that you mentioned is that it is with partialities that the CNN report is, and the case of the recent looting or stealing of the fuel. Again, we have reports, we received just reports from the Federal Defense Force that in the fortresses they retreated from, the Federal Defense Force got some medicines that were just imported as aid to Tigray people, and also the materials, I mean just the food from the US aid and other organizations were there in the fortress TPLF were using. But this has never been reported or condemned critically by those aid agencies, and also the CNN has not just made reports or analysis kind of thing.
Look, on this, what's interesting is, CNN was propagating the Ethiopian government as making use of mass starvation. The government opened every road and every opportunity for US aid to access people in Tigray. But that was used for political purposes, rather. And that was used to, to serve the TPLF forces. So, and it's quite clear that the aid didn't reach the people of Tigray. It's rather reached the soldiers.
Sure.
And that, like I said to you before, the equation of the CNN effect and the US aid is the same. So one is making use of aid as an instrument to affect the image of a particular country and to change the whole system of that particular country, and CNN acting like a propaganda machine. And most of the time they are making use of fake news about this country. You remember last time we talked about CNN reporting that TPLF forces are almost to occupy Addis Ababa.
Okay.
That was far from truth. And how would that be possible? The very interesting thing is, when they report about Ethiopia, they act as if they have office or satellite station in Tigray. But we know that there is no CNN satellite station or people reporting from Tigray. When you watch the television, it's like they are reporting from Tigray, Makale.
Sure.
So that is how they make, fake of the story. And at the same time, if you keep on reading, for example, I identified about 20 scenarios in which on which CNN was working against this country and in favor, in a complete favor of the TPLF. So you saw acting like being there and giving exaggerated picture about what's on the ground. And that's how they dismantle, they hammer a particular country. And we know why this is so. In the first place, if you remember, once you're not able to be dictated by a particular country, like the United States, you are against. So the time that the reform has taken clear shape, they identified that this government is not, to be dictated by the United States. So the only machine they can manipulate is TPLF. And if a country is not in a position to be dictated by the United States, they at least want to give you some assignments, like war, lack of peace, supporting rebel group. How on earth a country like the United States supports a labor, a group defined by a country as a terrorist? That's, I think, very strange. A country taken as an example of democracy and rule of law, trying to help a rebel group which is considered or which is labeled as terrorist by the parliament of a particular country like Ethiopian.
By the way, the US, the CIA report also just shows that in 2012 or 13, the US government listed the TPLF when the TPLF was leading Ethiopia, governing Ethiopia, that the TPLF was just listed in the CIA's list as terrorist
group. Yeah, we know. You are right. You are right that, and that means it's the same thing. Very strange is this is a legal government elected by the people.
Yeah, sure.
So if you are, as a country like the United States, supporting a labor group, that means it is just going against the people or having a twisted understanding of the Ethiopian people. So this is not only about the government, it's about the people, disgracing the people. And what we need to understand from these propaganda machines like CNN, we know that they are commercials in many ways, and they are motivated by the policies of the government of their own country. But that, in one way or the other, the point is Ethiopia should take some lessons.
Okay.
Take some lessons from this. Wherever there is a war, there is a United States, no doubt, in one or the other way. And in that scenario, the people of that particular country should be united in one way or the other. After the war, the people can settle their differences. But while the war scenario, the people of a country should not encourage or invite the intervention or the interference of the United States or the international peacekeepers. Because after the intervention, we wouldn't find the country the same.
Sure.
And there would not be any room for discussion or entertaining diverse ideologies. So individuals should also be very careful of the fake news communicated, mouth to mouth or from social media to social media. So every time we listen to something, we should reserve ourselves and think to understand the content, the context, and should compare and contrast, analyze, and we should not, communicate the same news. We should not act like a pipe, because every information has its own impact. And at a national level, there must be a clear media war front from one central pool. So I think all the media, government or private, social or mainstream, they should work together, and because this is a common point. if we don't have a country and there is no any room for entertaining situations or difference.
In line with this, just I could see from some social media, there are just certain campaigns here locally and abroad that the CNN is preparing to misinform or disinform and just trying, cooking some sort of stories regarding the recent conflict in North Ethiopia. And what preparations should the government, diplomats, particularly the diaspora community and the Ethiopian media need to work on?
Yeah, you're right. The first thing is about those. CNN is excellent at misinforming and disinforming, especially disinforming. So they often try to give a different picture about the situation, or they manufacture. They create a story and they give it a context. For example, they are trying to accuse the Ethiopian government and the military of genocidal attempts. By the way, who is genocidal? I think TPLF is well known for this since its birth. Even when it was a leadership or a government, it was known for genocide. We can take the genocide of the Oromos in the Somalia, and you remember the genocide in Gambela, and when TPLF was a government committing genocidal. And think of now when it is in the jungle. You remember how the Amhara and the Afar region, and the acts, the looting, the killing, mass killing, ethnic cleansing, that
the Galikoma genocide, where over 100 children and women were killed, and also the China, the Maikadra.
Yeah, we can mention a number of cases. All these cases were not mentioned or raised on CNN. There is enough data for that. And now they are trying to cook a story. The government of Ethiopia and its military committed this or that kind of genocide. So that is false. We know that CNN is known for manipulating statistics to give a particular picture. And the data sources are often people from somewhere. They are unnamed people. The storytellers that we will see the documentary very soon that CNN is planning to prepare against the Ethiopian government. We will see people who are not familiar with the context. And we will see how CNN, manufacture stories. So something interesting that we need to know is, like I said before, we should collect ourselves in the first place. You see, the whole process, the whole linear process is the CNN effect. First, they mischaracterize the country. They give different picture about the country. They act as if they are caretakers, as voices of the voiceless. No, that's false. And this is an attempt to put agenda, to set agenda for the Congress.
Okay.
And then they keep on working very hard for for military intervention. And after the military intervention, there will be too much devastation, too much consequences, and they leave all of a sudden unpleasantly. Okay. So this is the whole process. And this whole process is propagated or designed and promoted by CNN effect. So as Ethiopians, we need to be very careful. Now, we have a problem of just taking the information given to us without checking and balancing. So we need to take time to check and balance. If not,
in fact, the diaspora community have just started campaigns against misinformation and campaigns against just the U.S. policy against Ethiopia, particularly regarding this recent situation. As you said, equating treating equally the TPLF rebel groups and also the government.
And so very interesting point here is, look, the most important point that we need to be very careful at, understanding the steps, because the U.S. policy is dictated by the CNN effect. So we need to know, we need to follow the CNN. And because we know the experience in different countries.
Sure.
So we should have our own way of, you see, without, being harmed by the consequences of the interferences in one or the other way, because they are bringing the agenda to the UN, they are bringing the agenda to the Senate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Antena, for just sharing your views and also experiences on the CNN effect and the Ethiopian cause. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, this is a conversation with Dr. Antanet, a guy from Addis Ababa University School of Journalism and Communication. We talked a lot of issues on the CNN effect and the Ethiopian cause and the relation between the CNN as well as other media's aid agencies, the US government and the TPLF, which is characterized as the terrorist group by the Ethiopian parliament. Thank you so much for watching us, and see you another time. I'm Sintayo Tamrat with this edition.